So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for coming to Darwin Day 2015, where we're celebrating the diversity of life and the great man's birthday. I want to remind you that there's still plenty of things available outside. Darwin's Deli still has a lot of pizza. We could not get the sea turtle that he was so fond of due to legal restraints, but I'm sure he would have enjoyed the pizza greatly. There is, of course, at the main table, the requested donation bin, where we appreciate, if you love us, bringing speakers in and dinosaur fossils and putting face painting onto the kids. If you could, a tip helps us do this. We do not get paid to bring intelligent people here to talk to you. We sometimes even have to front our own money for it. So if you'd like to see what they do, if you'd like to make sure that Carl Sagan Day still happens in November, please think about giving us really, anything will come. I'm not going to even set a number on it because at that point I sound like one of those guys I'm thinking. So, I am interested in this because invasive species are crawling all around my school constantly, and I'm the guy who's usually called upon to try to get them into a cardboard box and get out of here. So I'm going to be listening to this one with bells on. Ladies and gentlemen, from the educational
Research and Education.
I'm sorry. From the Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center, or U of F, we have Rebecca Harvey speaking on indicator species and invasive species. Let's have a hand.
Hi everyone. Thanks for coming and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be part of this event. I am going to be talking about both native and non-native reptiles today in the context of evolution and the wonderful species that we have here. Some may be not so wonderful depending on how you look at them, but all very interesting. I just unrolled a python skin up here to give you a sense, and I'm going to be talking about Burmese pythons, among others. So this is just another day at the office for me. Not really, actually. I studied sociology in Wisconsin, and this is like the farthest from my mind of where I thought I would end up, but it's been interesting. I actually don't do this very often, and I'm okay with that. But I work with a team of wildlife ecologists at the Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center for University of Florida. And our group focuses on the largest, most charismatic reptiles in the Everglades. So my talk is going to have two parts. The first part will be focusing on our native reptiles, our crocodilians, alligators, and crocodiles as indicator species. And the second part focuses on the newcomers, the non-native large snakes, constrictor snakes, and large lizards that are now invading a lot of South Florida. So let's start off with just some definitions. I suppose you all have had some exposure to these ideas, but just to make sure we're on the same page, when we talk about native species, we are referring to animals and plants whose presence in the region is a result only of natural processes. So these are the species that have been here much longer than we have in most cases. Non-native and synonyms for non-native are exotic or alien species. You hear all those terms thrown around and they mean the same thing, and those are just animals or plants that were introduced from another region of the world. And so they now are breeding and established in a new area than where they originally came from. Now there are many species, non-native species, that are here that aren't a problem really at all. But when a species starts to cause harm or has the potential, is believed to have a strong potential to cause harm, then it's referred to as an invasive species. So that's a small portion of the ones that are non-native. So non-native plants are animals that cause or are likely to cause harm either to the environment, to the economy, or sometimes to public health through spreading disease or through a safety concern. So to acknowledge the day and the event, this is Darwin Day, and so thinking about native and non-native species really sheds light on evolution, because the real way that an invader becomes an invasive species is, I guess the source of that is that it hasn't evolved in this environment and adapted over millions of, hundreds of thousands of years. And so a lot of these animals don't have predators, and that's really the cause of the problem, is that they did not adapt with the other animals that live here. All right, so here are the two species of crocodilian. Can anyone tell me which is which? The top, the bottom? Alan?
The alligator one on the bottom?
That's right. So on top, we have the American crocodile. And actually, a lot of people don't even know that there is an American crocodile in Florida. But Florida is the only place on Earth where crocodiles and alligators coexist. So it's pretty interesting. And it's only the south tip of Florida. I'll show you a map in just a second. So the American crocodile is on top, American alligator is here. The color is the major difference. The crocodiles are lightish gray, where the alligators are this very familiar dark, bluish, greenish, black almost. And the shape of the snout is also a key difference. The crocodile's a little bumpier here, and mostly it's just a lot more narrow and tapered. And I have a skull here. You're all welcome to come up and look at that after the talk too. So that's the crocodile, and the alligator is a much broader snout. And our crocodiles also have a reputation of being very dangerous, but they're actually not. That's a common misperception. They're much more timid than the alligators, and they also have been they're still on the endangered species list. They were listed as endangered up until 2007, and they were downlisted to threatened. But the population has recovered quite a bit. So these are both the family of crocodilians, and you probably all heard that crocodiles and alligators are descendants of dinosaurs, and that is true. They're actually sort of cousins to dinosaurs. They're descendants of the Archosauria family, which also included the dinosaurs. And they basically evolved 200 million years ago in the Triassic period, and their bodies and their behavior has changed very little since then. So talk about evolution and a species that is adapted to its environment. We have a real survivor here, because they've been virtually unchanged for that long. They're more closely related to birds than lizards, actually. There are 23 species of crocodilians throughout the world, and they're pretty interesting, ranging from little caimans that live, this is actually a Chinese alligator, that's the smallest one. We have caiman that's this one in the Amazon, that's a relative to the alligator. And then we have these kind of funny, interesting looking ones called the gharials, with these really skinny snouts that are in India and Southeast Asia. And in South Florida, in the Americas, the range of American crocodile goes through Mexico, Central America, and the northern part of South America. And its most northern part is right here on the tip of Florida. So that's the only part in the U.S. where the American crocodile inhabits. And its historical range was up to almost as far as, past West Palm Beach, really as far as Lake Okeechobee. But these days, they're really just located down in the tip of Everglades National Park and the Keys and Biscayne Bay. American alligator, as you all know, is much more widespread, and it's common throughout the southeastern United States. How many people have seen pictures like this? Yeah, some heads nodded. So you're kind of familiar with the Everglades and what's going on in recent years, actually many, many recent decades, really, to attempt to restore the Everglades. We have this, so we refer to this whole area south of Lake Okeechobee as the Greater Everglades System. A lot of times people think the Everglades, they just think Everglades National Park, but actually the ecosystem is really this whole large area. Historically, before there were Europeans in Florida, it was called the River of Grass, and was characterized by about 60-mile wide sheet flow. So just water that very slowly flowed down a very, very shallow elevation change, very consistently all the way down to Florida Bay. Starting in the late 1800s, and then especially in the 20th century, humans started trying to manage first to drain the Everglades for agriculture. That didn't work so well. To control some of it for flood control, which was necessary given some really devastating hurricanes in the early part of the century. And then later for development after World War II as the area developed. So the area was chopped up by canals and what's called compartment. So no longer is a straight open river of grass, but is now chopped up into smaller sections. And since 2000, when the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan was passed, efforts have been underway to try to restore it to closer to what it was naturally. And these are the kind of plans. The original is what the flow of water looked like, and the goals are to restore. So this is what it is now with water going in all these channels, and the goal is to restore a lot of this flow. It'll never be exactly like it was in the past, of course. But the idea of Everglades restoration is to get the water right, so to improve those conditions for the animals and plants that live in the Everglades. So this Everglades system is very large and very complex, and we can't monitor every single aspect of it. So what the planners have done is to select a number of ecological indicators, and what these are sometimes they're single species or groups of species or communities that are used to assess how healthy the ecosystem is and how it's responding to the changes. And indicators must be representative of the ecosystem. They must show some response as the system changes. Related to restoration goals, they must be easy to monitor, and they must be understandable to managers and policymakers. So my team of ecologists that I work with focus on the alligators and crocodiles, and they're selected as one of the indicators. And we think that particularly with being understandable to managers and the public and policymakers, they really top the list for that, because alligators in particular are characteristic of the Everglades, and everyone understands them, and crocodiles as well. So they're one of the key indicators. So why are they important to understanding what's going on in the Everglades? There are a few reasons for this, and one is that they're top predators. And the top predator in an ecosystem, especially an ecosystem like the Everglades, which is mostly aquatic, so it's mostly a wetland system, they have a major effect on the whole food web. If you take away the alligators, then everything else will be out of balance, and crocodiles as well. And also, both alligators and crocodiles are very sensitive to salinity. So as Everglades restoration proceeds and more fresh water is coming down through the system, alligators and crocodiles are both going to do better because they need that fresh water. Even though crocodiles live in more of the saline, the salty water, they're not saltwater crocodiles like they have in Australia. They still need, especially when they're young, they need fresh water too. So they're very responsive to the changes that are being made. And we're already seeing some of this as some of the Everglades restoration has taken place, that crocodiles down in Florida Bay are doing better. And finally, alligators are important to the ecosystem for another specific reason. They're ecosystem engineers, what we call. They actually, by their behavior, they change the habitats and provide habitats in the marsh for a number of other animals and plants. And they do this through building alligator holes. So they actually build these holes, and fish live in there during the dry season. Wading birds come there to feed. It's a little dangerous for the wading birds because there's an alligator lurking in there, but they have no other choice. So all of these other animals and the plant species as well that need the water wouldn't survive the dry season without the alligator. And does anyone know the term, just shout it out, for a species that has more of an effect on an ecosystem than any other species, that by being there it affects all the other plants and animals? Keystone, thank you. Yeah, so alligators are what is called a keystone species because of that very important role they have for the other animals and plants. So we monitor the alligators and crocodiles regularly, 3 times a year, I guess twice a year for alligators, 3 times a year for crocodiles, to see how they're doing. And this keeps our field ecologists very busy. They focus on the small ones for the crocodiles and monitor the nests and see how well the hatchlings are growing. And as I said, the salinity changes are doing well for them. Alligators, however, we also monitor their body condition, which is a ratio of their weight to their length. And that is actually very low in the Everglades. Alligators down in the Everglades are very skinny for the most part compared to anywhere North Florida, Georgia. They're bigger, they're longer, and they're fatter as well. And that's a sign of how traumatized the ecosystem really is, that it's not as healthy of an ecosystem, there isn't as much nutrients available for them. So, we're hoping in the coming decades as the restoration proceeds more that's going to start to change. So as I said earlier, so the idea of an indicator is to make it simple, to kind of boil it down to are they doing well or not. So we've developed this stoplight indicator map, so basically green is good. So this map shows that nowhere in the Everglades are alligators and crocodiles doing good, but yellow is does not meet restoration targets and merits attention, so it's not good, but it's not terrible. And red is substantial deviations from restoration targets. So through a lot of the system, these animals still aren't doing very well. However, like I said, the crocodiles are starting to do better in the southern part. I'm going to shift gears now to talk about some of our other large and charismatic reptiles in the Everglades. Does anyone have any questions before I change the topic? We'll have time at the end as well if you want to think about them.
You're actually fast forwarding.
How did I do that? Okay. Has anyone seen this picture before or something like it?
I hope not.
There was actually one circulated on the internet, and I think it was like 2008 or something, of an alligator and a python challenging each other, and yeah, didn't end well for either of them. And that actually started a lot of the awareness about Burmese pythons in the Everglades. And I imagine many of you are familiar with Burmese pythons. You may not be as familiar with some of the other species that I'm going to talk about today. South Florida is really a hotspot for invasive species of all kinds, and reptiles in particular. And there are several reasons for this. First of all, the climate. The map here shows the freeze probability of peninsular Florida, and the blue here is 90%. So up here it freezes pretty much every year in the winter. We go down to Miami, it's a 0 to 10% chance of freezing in any given winter. So we have this very unique subtropical climate at the tip of South Florida that is unlike anywhere else in the continental U.S. And so the similar climates are across the Caribbean and the islands. So historically and evolutionarily, that has led to many fewer native species of lizards being in Florida, because it's this meeting of the temperate and the tropical. And there are actually only 11 species of native lizards. And I'm going to show you there are many more species of non-native lizards. Y'all, hang on just one second.
During this break, I would like to remind everyone that after the presentation, she has brought an incredible amount of materials, stickers, bookmarks, posters, placed over at the table over there by the fire extinguisher after the presentation. Please go take what you want to your heart's content.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'll try to remind you at the end too. There's plenty of information there. As I was saying, okay, so the climate, and because a lot of the non-native animals that have come here are from tropical climates, they take very well to our subtropical climate as well as the habitats. These vast areas of the Everglades are pretty unique in South Florida. Also, there are major ports of entry in Miami and Fort Lauderdale where the ships are coming in all the time with all kinds of plants and animals, many of which are not regulated very much yet. And in addition to that, there's a growing captive wildlife industry of people breeding and raising wildlife to sell in the pet trade here, and that's really sprung up in the last couple of decades. And that, combined with hurricanes, which sometimes has damaged those facilities and a lot of those animals have gotten out, has led to the introduction. A lot of people have traced, some scientists have traced the first introduction of Burmese pythons to Hurricane Andrew. That they've actually done genetic analysis and have been able to find out that a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them were also pets that were released unintentionally or intentionally by people. But several of them got out through Hurricane Andrew and started breeding and took us to where we are now. So this graph shows just how dramatically this growth has happened in recent decades. There have been records of non-native reptiles, snakes, even Burmese pythons going back to the 50s, 60s, like one or two you'll see here or there. But this is what it looked like. There were just a couple up until gradually in the 40s, 50s, 60s, but then in the 80s and the 90s, and really in the 2000s, because of the pet trade, I guess just the growth and trade of all these animals, the numbers, and it's probably also partly detection too, that there's probably more people out there finding them. The number of invasions, just different species of reptiles and amphibians that have been found is now up to over 150. And the number that are established, which means that they're breeding and reproducing, and in a lot of cases here to stay, fair to say, is now up to 62 or something like that. A lot.
This is species, not quantity.
These are species, yeah, different species of animals. We often don't have any idea of the quantity. It's just like a lot. It's hard to estimate population sizes. There's also been a change in the type of invasive reptile and amphibian. The older invaders tended to be these small lizards and frogs, and these are ones that are very familiar in our backyards. And many people aren't even aware that these are non-native invasive species. I guess I would call them non-native. It's maybe debatable in some cases whether they're having a negative effect on the ecology. The brown anoles that we see everywhere, those are non-native. Cuban tree frogs, these ones do definitely have a negative effect. They eat a lot of our small native green tree frogs. So these guys have displaced a lot of the native species. We also have the house geckos, Indo-Pacific geckos. So all these ones that arrived several decades ago usually came accidentally through cargo. They were stowaways on ships. They eat mainly insects, so that's also why they have less of an effect as the big top predators that we have now on the ecology. And they also mostly thrive in disturbed in human habitats, in urban and suburban areas. So they weren't going out to the natural areas very much. Now in the past 10, 15 years, we've had this shift as a result of the growing pet trade, where we have large-bodied lizards and snakes. These are the Burmese pythons, the tegu lizards, the Nile monitor lizards, and other ones that are all predators. And these are predators of vertebrates. So they're up high on the food chain, and they're going to have a bigger effect on the overall ecosystem. And they also were introduced definitely through the pet trade. So, whether those were people thinking they were doing the right thing for their pet that they didn't want to take care of and saying, go be free. A lot of times well-intentioned, but it actually ends up having a very negative effect. So one of our main outreach campaigns, which I think really has changed attitudes and norms, is don't let it loose. And I have stickers over on the and brochures over on the table over there. So the idea is don't let it loose. Anyone you know who has an exotic pet and wants to set it free, no, don't do it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some options that are much better than ever letting it loose. And so that's the shift. And impacts of these invasive reptiles are that they compete with the native species. We have one endangered snake called the indigo snake, which is very rare. It's endangered, and a lot of these snakes grow even bigger than it does, but they're eating the exact same food that it would eat. So they're pushing this endangered species even farther to endangerment. Of course, they eat native species, it's a big impact, and so they can alter the entire ecosystem. And so many agencies are working together under this umbrella of the Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. So this is a big issue in South Florida. It brings together federal, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, National Park Service, as well as state and local governments, all working on this. So this is what we call the invasion curve. And this is a tool for understanding how to manage invasive species. It basically shows 4 phases of an invasion from prevention. And prevention, eradication, containment, and resource protection and long-term management. And what the curve shows is that as we go up this curve, the cost increases a lot. So the best thing to do, and the take-home message of this graph, is that if you can stop a species before it even gets here, you're going to save a lot of money and a lot of effort. And if you can catch it early, this is where there's just a small number, you detect them right when they arrive and can find them and get them out before they become a problem, you're also not going to have to spend a lot of money. But as the species spreads, it goes into the containment phase and then the resource management phase, then it gets harder and harder and more expensive to manage. And unfortunately, it seems that public awareness typically comes around here, so too late. So that's something that we're trying to be mindful of and do more outreach and get people to be aware of this issue in South Florida that is so huge. So I'm going to just give an example of each of those phases for reptiles. Prevention. So it's a snake species that we would really like and would be in all of our interests to prevent from establishing itself in South Florida is the puff adder. And this is actually a result of a published study, a quantitative risk assessment that was done of all these species that are popular in the pet trade. And believe it or not, some of you may know people who actually like to keep venomous snakes. The puff adder is the most venomous snake on the African continent. It's responsible for more snakebite deaths in Africa than anything else. But there are people who like to keep these as pets, and they're not prohibited. They're regulated to some extent, but they're still traded and they're still here. And so I think that speaks for itself. Why we want to prevent that. Eradication. Now this guy's not nearly as scary looking as the puff adder. It's not venomous. It's actually really cute and beautiful. It's about this big. It's called a veiled chameleon. And I actually just gave one away today that my daughter and I said goodbye to because we had it as a pet and realized we didn't want to take care of it anymore and found a nice new adopter and a home for it. They're great. They're fascinating pets, but they're difficult pets. And that's why they end up in the wild probably more often. So if anyone you know wants an exotic pet, the rule of thumb is buy one that is minimal effort, and chameleons are not a good beginner pet. They take a lot of water, they're very sensitive to the conditions. Bearded dragons are great if someone wants a lizard. They're much easier. Iguanas are not so good. Of course, we already have lots of iguanas in the wild here. But they're kind of nasty, and with those big tails, they're harder to control. So nice small lizards that don't get too big are a good bet. But anyways, these ones are established in a small area of South Miami-Dade County in avocado groves. And so they're actually, they're eating the insects there. They can be affecting the habitat for birds. But they're in a small enough area that they could be eradicated. And then we get into the containment phase. This is a species that has surpassed being in a small area where we can really know where it is. It's spread out, it's in southern Florida City, but it's starting to spread northward, and it's starting more of a concern as it's starting toward Everglades National Park and towards the coast. And over here you see these dots here. Turkey Point Power Plant are one of the key nesting areas of American crocodiles. And the tegu lizard, this guy grew, I had a stuffed one, but I lent it to someone else today. But it's about this big. It grows to 5 feet long, about 6 feet, including the tail. And they're big, they're big like this. And they eat everything, they're omnivores, but their favorite food is eggs. And so anything that nests on the ground is threatened by these, including, if they get to the coast, sea turtles and crocodiles. So this is a major management focus right now, is trying to bring this one back into a smaller area, but it's beyond eradication. And there's documented tegu eating an alligator. And we don't have any documentation of them eating crocodile eggs yet, but we are monitoring those areas where the crocodiles nest. Long-term management, unfortunately, that's where the Burmese python is now. This is a particularly large Burmese python. They are not all that large in the Everglades, but they can grow to over 20 feet. They just thrive in the Everglades. It's just such a perfect environment for them, despite all the efforts. And I think the efforts probably started too late, because the nature of an invasive species is to reproduce very quickly, and that's why it's such a challenge to manage. That they're spread over a very large area of the Everglades now, and so the phase we're into now is just trying to keep them out of new areas like the Keys and away from bird rookeries, nesting areas for wood storks and other birds like that. And this is an example of what a Burmese python eats to grow from a hatchling to a 13-foot adult. Just example, lots of different birds and small mammals and alligators as well. And this is one that was caught with a 72-pound adult deer in its gut. Managers have tried a variety of methods. Traps don't work so well because Burmese pythons are ambush predators. They lie in wait, and they're extremely well camouflaged. And they don't go to prey. They just curl up in a ball and wait for it to come by, and then they lash out and grab it. So if the trap with a live animal in it doesn't work so well, because why would we go in there when there's still plenty to eat in the natural habitat? They've tried dogs, and dogs are actually pretty effective. These are dogs that sort of flunked out of drug sniffing school, I guess, police dog school, because they weren't disciplined enough in that type of environment. They do really well outside and running free. And they've had good success with this, that the dogs can really sniff out the pythons and help people find them. And then we do something which is called Judas snakes, as in Judas the betrayer. And this is taking one out, usually a male, and implanting a radio transmitter in it. And then, so you do a surgery on it, and then you re-release it back, which seems a little weird, The National Park Service was paying us to send them back out there. But then it would lead to these large groups. Burmese pythons breed in groups, so you can find an aggregation where a whole bunch of females with eggs would be in, and get the nests out. And then there's also been some efforts toward public hunting. And maybe some of you, did anyone hear about the Python Challenge in 2013? A few of you, yeah. Okay, so that was the first time that they opened it up as a public competition to the general public to hunt Burmese pythons. And they may be doing it again. We're not really sure if they're going to do it or maybe a different way now. The results of the challenge, it was 5 weeks where people could go and hunt Burmese pythons. And 1,558 general competitors signed up, and 24 permit holders, and these are people who were already trained and kind of on a regular basis removing pythons. The 1,558 people together removed 26 snakes in 5 weeks. The 24 people together removed 42 snakes. They were hunting more often and they had more experience. Basically, it doesn't say that public hunting is the answer, but this was more snakes, 68, than was ever removed in a similar period of time. And it also says that getting these people involved more on a regular basis could really make an impact. So this picture epitomizes the problem. Who sees the fur-based python? Does anyone not see the fur-based python? Yeah, okay. So it's here. It's right here, curled up. And it is just that well camouflaged. Now you guys can see it because this picture was taken looking up, looking down at it. But imagine if you were walking by over here. Would you see that in that vegetation? I don't think so. So even the most trained and skilled hunters can walk right by them. And they also are semi-aquatic, so a lot of times they're in the water where you can't see them at all. And they're just extremely well adapted to, even though they didn't evolve here and adapt here, they are extremely well adapted to the South Florida environment. So, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this if no one has, but they are here to stay. And so we can discuss that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. There are definitely different views on that, but it is the truth at this point. Maybe the population can be contained and reduced, but I don't believe they're going away. So let's talk about what we can do, because public involvement is very important to invasive species management. As I said, awareness is key. Awareness, of the public can help build support for policies and new regulations. We need new regulations of the species that are coming in, and all of this, of course, needs funding to control the problem. But there are also ways you can get more directly involved, and some of it is, I didn't talk about plants at all, but of course, focusing on native plants in your own garden. There are work days in natural areas where you can help get rid of invasive plants. And a few ideas are, one of the key ways that people can help is by reporting. So if any of you ever go out to natural areas, or even in some suburban areas, we want you to report the invasive species, particularly those ones that I focused on, like the tegu lizards, the monitor lizards, the really big ones. Don't report iguanas. Iguanas are pretty much here to stay too. They're herbivores. They don't have as big of an impact on the environment, and they're mostly just in suburban areas. But if you ever see these guys or the monitors, there's a phone number, 1-888, I've got one, and it's got little snakes for the 8s to help you remember it's 888 instead of 800. I've got one is an app you can get for Android or iPhone, and it's cool because it's like a guidebook too. So you might not know offhand what these look like, but you can educate yourself using the map of plants and animals, insects, birds. It's got everything, fish, and then I've got one.org is also the website. And I have bumper stickers over there, more information about that. Also, if anyone fishes, does anyone fish? Any anglers here? And I didn't really talk about it today either, but there are a lot of non-native and invasive fish. The freshwater fish, you can go fishing anytime and target non-native species, and you can find out on myfwc.com, FWC's website, about what the non-native species are, and there's usually no limits on how many you can catch. There's also an annual non-native fish roundup that is hosted by evergladescisma.org. I'm going to throw a lot of websites at you, so if anyone has a pencil and wants to write them down, evergladescisma.org, myfwc. And if you're a diver or a snorkeler, lionfish in the reef saltwater ecosystems are a big invasive species that's a huge problem too, and we want people to help control those. Don't let it loose. I mentioned this earlier. That's the key. So as well as reporting what's already out there, the public is very important. You're the only ones who can prevent more from escaping. So educate your friends and your family, and have stickers. Don't let it loose over there. In addition to just knowing that you're not supposed to let it loose, it's hard. If you have an exotic species, you don't know what to do with it. But there is an option. It's called pet amnesty, and this is FWC, that's Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's program. It's called Exotic Pet Amnesty Program. And again, here's the website. And they have events where you can turn in your exotic pet. It could be a lizard or a snake or a bird or a mammal. They have monkeys sometimes and prairie dogs and all sorts of interesting things. Not dogs and cats, but anything that's exotic. And they find new adopters. They adopt them out to new homes. So it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the pet owner, it's a win for the animal because they have a new home, and it's a win for the environment. And the next one is March 7th. It's in Miami. And this is our website, one more website to throw at you. This is my group, which is crocdoc.ifis.ufl.edu, and you can find more about the work that we do there. Thank you, and follow us on Facebook, the Crocdocs. Thank you so much for your time. Happy to take questions. Yes?
I have two questions. The first is on the not slide.
Yes.
Critters about a snail.
Yeah, there is a giant African land snail. I don't have a picture of this here, but there's a brochure over there that's called the Invasion From brochure that has a picture of one in someone's hand. I think they're like 8 inches long, and the shell is like about this big. So if anyone has like snail phobias like I do, they're kind of creepy, but they're very confined. So they're in that eradication phase. They're in the Coral Gables area of Miami-Dade County, and USDA is all over them because they're a huge threat to crops and agriculture. So they're taking care of them. Yeah.
How did you transition from sociology to
Okay, so that's a good question. I actually still do sociology, and I didn't talk about that today, but I wear many hats, I guess. I was in a sociology graduate program in Wisconsin, and I didn't at the time want to go on for my PhD, so I said I could do the master's and then get out and work for a while. And I've always been interested in the environment. I'm from California. I did tons of hiking and backpacking, was just a nature girl. So I decided to get an environmental studies master's as well. So I did 2 masters at the same time, which was actually super easy because I could only write one thesis. I only had to write one and add one more person to the committee. Not a lot of people know that you can do that. And but now I also do survey research in my job too. I'm doing a survey right now of people's perceptions and awareness of lionfish. So it's been pretty cool. I've been able to do both. And then I came here for my husband's job. He's a professor, so I'm like, I guess I got to learn about the Everglades now. Yeah, another question?
The other question is, in addition to Amnesty Day in Miami, didn't a place open on the Amnesty Day in Margate 2 or 3 years ago that turned in reptiles and snakes? Does anyone remember that?
I don't know about that. I don't know if that's a private kind of sanctuary or something, or...
I never seen it in Sunset, no.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what that is. The Amnesty Days are annual, usually. There's one in Zoo Miami. They have one in Palm Beach now. And we've had a couple in Broward, but we didn't have one this year. But then they also take them regularly, too. FWC does, and it's that same 888 I've got one. That's also the Amnesty hotline, so you don't have to wait for an event for one of the Amnesty Days. You can call that number anytime, and they'll find an adopter for your pet. Yes?
Have pheromones been used to try to attract and catch the pythons or any of these other species that so well?
It's a good question. I believe so. I'm trying to think. That's all part of the trapping research, which I don't know a whole lot of the details of. I think the pheromones, I don't know. I think it's still the same issue that the pythons just aren't really going into the traps much. So I think if it were very effective, we would hear about it. I know that it's tested, but I don't know why. I'm sorry. Any other questions?
I heard that the...
May I have your attention, please? celebration of Darwin Day at 2 p.m. in the library's
I heard that
auditorium.
the iguana
Brendan
studies
Hall
here,
from the First Citizens for Science
snails
will
and
be
bird
giving a
eggs.
talk
That's
on
where
the
they
fight
just
for teaching evolution in our schools.
They're
Also,
very
outside the library, there's a lot of kids event, Boston Days, dinosaur, more and more. Also, at 2 p.m. in celebration of Black History Month, there's a drumming demonstration by Positively Africa. Please join us. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm surprised to hear you say that iguanas are here to stay. I used to see them all over my neighborhood, but then we had like the teeny little freeze for people like that 3 days.
Yeah.
And it seemed like they were
But
gone.
they're back.
Oh, really?
They are, and they're not back to the extent, that's why I say it, because I think we were wondering for a few years, that was 2010, January, which was a record, it wasn't a teeny freeze, I mean, for South Florida, that was a record cold spell, pretty much historical.
I know we can't count on that, but
Yeah.
does that help?
Yeah, that greatly reduced the iguana population, but in the last year, 1 to 2 years, they're rebounding a lot. And I don't know, like I said, they're not a focus of management, so they're not really being monitored. You can't monitor everything, but
So you think they're here to stay?
I say that because even that historic cold freeze, 4 years later, they start coming back. So the climate is warming, not getting colder. You know, so how many more of those are we going to have, and how much worse would they have to be to wipe it out for longer than 4 years?
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry to be the bearer of that. Yes? Another question?
We were talking about the Python challenge. I remember right before Katrina hit, the New Orleans police declared open season on nutria hunting.
Okay.
And I was wondering, I don't remember whether it was really effective in reducing the nutria population.
Yeah, I don't know. That was before I was into this work, and I honestly don't know much about nutria because they're not here. We do have a lot of feral pigs here, though, which you can hunt as well. And pythons, actually anyone can go and hunt them at any time. You just have to, there are regulations on the types of methods that you can use. You're not supposed to shoot them. You can do other things.
What keeps the pythons in check in their neighborhood?
More competition, I think, more predation. Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically, but there must be more predators that are eating the young. Because once they get big, they are the top predator. And for some reason, we don't have a lot because what do we have out there that's a predator? Raccoons will eat the eggs, but there are a lot fewer raccoons there, some pythons and bears, so now it's kind of a vicious cycle. But nothing else other than alligators is really going to eat them.
The table lizards.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't know what the future holds. It's a new world, I guess. Yeah.
How well do the alligators do against the python?
Let's see. There are, the gut analyses of pythons show a lot of alligators. It's a major component of their diet. Alligators also eat pythons, but I believe that it's more pythons. The estimate, because we don't monitor everything that alligators eat, because how can we? But the estimate is that more pythons are eating alligators and vice versa. They grow really fast and a lot faster than alligators. So there's a window there where the alligator's bigger, they could eat them. But pythons have these incredible jaws. And if anyone's into this, I don't recommend watching the one that got all that press about the man who, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
But there are videos on YouTube of a python eating an alligator, and they have 6 or so different joints in their jaws, and it's actually fascinating and totally amazing how much that mouth can open up to eat something really large. So I think they have the advantage in that sense, plus being a constrictor. Once they get to a certain size, I don't think the alligators do too well.
And on that note, I would like to thank Ms. Harvey for her presentation, and we have